Humanity was not condemned for war. Not for weapons. Not for crime. Humanity was expelled from the Galactic Council for a single meeting protocol, where someone uttered the phrase, "This species smiles on the brink of destruction." And it was this phrase, not any weapon, that terrified the Council most. Give me 30 seconds, and I'll explain why this decision will be the biggest mistake in the history of the galaxy. Because on the day they cast humanity beyond the bounds of known space, without escort ships, without maps, without the right of return, the Council thought they were sending the species to a slow death in the void. Instead, they sent humanity right to the threshold of a civilization so ancient that the very concept of a Galactic Council will seem like yesterday's misunderstanding. It all began on Karaitun Station, in the hall where delegates from 43 species were meeting. The human representative, a woman named Elena Marchuk, stood alone in the center of the room, unguarded, unattended by lawyers, because humanity had simply been denied them. The accusation sounded absurd even to the accusers themselves, unpredictable behavior that poses a threat to the stability of the galactic order. A simpler translation would be, humans disobeyed the logic that all other species considered the only correct one. Humans argued with orders. Humans defended the weak without any benefit to themselves. Humans laughed in the face of death instead of fearing, as dictated by all the protocols of social behavior studied by the Council over 10,000 years of observing thousands of species. The High Delegate, a Krytal whose skin shifted color with emotion and at that moment glowed the cold blue of contempt, pronounced the verdict without a single hesitation: humanity is expelled from the Council. All colonies outside the home star system are annulled. Human transports are prohibited from using the Council's stable hyperlanes. From now on, humans travel only on their own routes, at their own risk, without protection, without assistance, without the right to return to known space. Elena Marchuk listened to this in silence. And then she did something the Council would never forget. She smiled. Not mockingly, not with hatred. She smiled the way someone smiles who has just realized they've finally been set free instead of being locked in a cage. "You're afraid of us because you don't understand us," she said before leaving the room. "And frankly, you're right to be afraid." The human fleet, 12,000 ships, civilian and military, gathered from everywhere in the week following the verdict, left known Council space without a single protest. People didn't beg to stay. People didn't wage war for the right to be part of the galactic community. They simply retreated into a darkness uncharted by any known species, where the Council had deliberately directed their exile corridor, believing there was nothing there but emptiness, radiation, and slow death. The Council was wrong about 3 things at once, and each of those mistakes would cost it an era. The first mistake, they thought humanity would collapse without outside support. But humans had been building civilization long before they even knew of other species in the universe. Isolation wasn't a new challenge for them. It was a familiar state, from which they emerged stronger each time. The second mistake, they thought the path of exile actually led to the void. Their intelligence was a good 8,000 years out of date. The Council's third and most terrible mistake, they had no idea that somewhere on the edge of this empty corridor slumbered a civilization so much older than the Council itself that for it, the entire history of the galactic community was nothing more than a brief flash against the backdrop of eternity. The human fleet sailed through the darkness for 42 days, saving fuel, saving air, saving hope. Children were born on ships in the darkness between the stars. Old people died holding the hands of their grandchildren, knowing their ashes would scatter among alien constellations that weren't even on human maps. People were starving, but they shared their last rations with those with more children. People were afraid, but they didn't stop singing in the evenings in the common areas of the ships, because song is the only weapon against despair that truly works. On the 38th day of the voyage, a naval engineer named Dmitry Sokolov, who had lost his wife back on Earth and was now the sole guardian of his young daughter, Anya, detected a strange signal on the distant sensors of the lead ship, the Nadezhda. The signal was faint, ancient, and so distorted by time that the onboard computer initially classified it as background noise from space. But Dmitry, defying protocol, defying fatigue, defying the voice in his head telling him to get at least 4 hours of sleep, remain at the control panel and listen to the signal over and over again until he understood the main point. It wasn't interference. It was a beacon. An artificial one. Judging by the signal degradation, it had been in operation for at least 50,000 years. 4 days later, the human fleet emerged from the darkness of the exile corridor and saw something that silenced even the most weary and desperate of the ship's passengers. Before them, in the middle of a void where, according to the Council, there was nothing, hung a structure of incredible scale, a ring half the diameter of Earth's orbit, woven from a material that human sensors could not even identify because the periodic table as we knew it simply did not include such elements. The ring was not dead. It glowed from within with a soft golden light, as if breathing, as if waiting. And it waited. Specifically for people. Specifically at this moment. The voice rang out across the fleet's communications systems simultaneously, not through radio waves, but directly, as if penetrating the very fabric of space. It was calm, ancient, and, oddly enough, friendly. You are the first species in 53,000 revolutions of your star to reach this place not seeking conquest, but refuge. That makes you worthy of entry. The beings who came out to meet the human fleet called themselves the Ilven. They were so ancient that they remembered a time when the galaxy itself looked different, when the stars that humans today call their sun and its neighbors were just forming from gas and dust. The Ilven had once been a race of builders, uniting thousands of species in a peaceful alliance long before the modern Galactic Council arose, but then a catastrophe occurred, a catastrophe they spoke of reluctantly, a catastrophe that forced most of their civilization into a deep slumber within this very ring, leaving only a handful of guardians to await the one worthy of awakening the rest. The guardians of Ilven watched the human fleet for those 42 days as they trudged through the darkness of exile. They saw people sharing their last piece of bread. They saw a father sing a lullaby to his daughter, knowing their fuel was running low. They saw the crew of one ship voluntarily cut their own oxygen rations to save the engine of another, a damaged ship carrying many children. And it was this, not weapons, not technology, not power, that convinced Ilven what the Galactic Council had failed to understand in all their years of contact with humanity: humanity is not dangerous because of its strength. Humanity is dangerous because it never surrenders, under any circumstances, and it does so not by order, but out of love for one another. We've been searching for a species like this for 50,000 years, said the Elder Keeper, a being whose form shifted before human eyes like light refracted through water. Not the strongest species. Not the smartest species. A species that doesn't abandon its own, even when the rest of the cosmos has turned its back on it. Within the ring, humanity found not a weapon for vengeance, though that was there too, a weapon capable of wiping the Galactic Council fleet from orbit with a single salvo. Humanity found something more valuable. Knowledge. Technology for terraforming entire star systems. Medicine capable of curing any known disease. And, most importantly, the historical archive of thousands of civilizations that had once been part of the Ilven Alliance and perished not from war, but from their own hubris, just as the Galactic Council now boasted, exiling humanity into the void, considering itself the pinnacle of intelligent evolution. Dmitry Sokolov, the engineer who first detected the ancient signal, stood inside the ring's vast chamber with his 7-year-old daughter, Anya, watching as the golden light slowly awakened the dormant cores of the ancient civilization, one by one, like stars igniting at dawn. Anya took her father's hand and asked in a simple, childish voice that cut through the solemnity of the moment better than any speech, "Daddy, are we home now?" And Dmitry, looking at the awakening light of antiquity around him, answered her as only a man who had endured exile and found on the other side of the darkness not death, but a beginning, could. "No, my dear. The entire cosmos is our home now. They just didn't let us believe it before." 2 Earth years had passed since humanity left the Council's known space as exiles, never to return. During this time, the Galactic Council had not received a single message from humans, not a single complaint, not a single request for a review of the sentence. The silence was so thick that some delegates began to rejoice. The species that had caused so much anxiety with its unpredictability had finally vanished from galactic history without a trace, as intended. And then, at the edge of known council space, a fleet appeared. Not 12,000 battered civilian ships, fleeing into the darkness with their last strength. But a fleet of ships built with technologies the Council had never seen before, ships glowing with the same golden light as the ancient ring of a civilization considered a long-lost legend throughout known space. At the head of the fleet stood a ship called the Hope, the very same one on which an engineer named Dmitry Sokolov had led humanity through the void for 42 days, relying only on his stubbornness and the love of his daughter. The connection opened not with a threat, but with a cold politeness that concealed a force capable of wiping out the entire Council fleet with a single salvo, but which chose conversation instead. The voice belonged to Elena Marchuk, the very woman the Council had once banished alone from the meeting room. "You exiled us because you feared what you didn't understand," she said calmly, without malice, without triumph, only with the absolute certainty of a being who no longer had anything to prove. "We thank you for this exile. For it is this exile that has brought us to the place where we finally became what we were always capable of becoming." The High Delegate Kratal, the same one who had pronounced judgment on humanity 2 years ago, felt his skin change color for the first time in his long life, a hue his language had no name for it was an emotion his species had never before experienced toward another being. Not superiority. Not contempt. Fear, mingled with something resembling respect. "What do you want?" the delegate finally asked, for the first time in the Council's history addressing a person not as an inferior but as an equal, because he no longer had any alternative. And Elena Marchuk, looking at the communication screen with the same smile the Council last saw 2 years ago in the courtroom, responded with a phrase that will go down in galactic history as the moment when everything changed forever. "We don't want revenge. We want only one thing, for you to remember this day. The day you banished a weak species into the void, thinking you were destroying it. And the day that same species returned home, not to seek revenge, but to offer you something you never had and, frankly, never will have, forgiveness." A silence fell over the Council chamber, a silence that even the most seasoned diplomats of the 43 species could not break. Because each of them, in that moment, understood one simple truth, one that humanity had carried within itself since the dawn of its history, long before the stars, long before ships, long before the Council itself. People can be exiled from any place in the universe. You can take away their home, their fleet, their status, their rights. But you cannot take away from them what matters most, the ability to find hope where it seems impossible, and to turn the most terrible exile into the beginning of the greatest story the galaxy has ever seen. If this story resonates with you, follow HFY Frontier TV, where we tell stories about how humanity is changing the fate of the galaxy.